Macaulay-Cardigan.
Mr. Macaulay-Cardigan.
Mr. Sajjan.
Mr. Sajjan.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Holland.
Mr. Holland.
You're looking at what could become a pivotal vote in the House of Commons. Nearly all Liberals voting no, while a majority of MPs vote yes on a Bloc Québécois motion to increase old age security, including 5 Liberal MPs and former Liberal Cabinet Minister Pablo Rodriguez on the yes side, voting with the opposition parties. It's a non-binding vote, but still a key vote, because this increase in seniors' benefits is a demand the Bloc wants met by the end of this month, where they will start negotiations with the other parties to trigger an election. Government House Leader Karina Gould spoke to us moments after that vote. Is the government in active negotiations with the Bloc on a compromise or a solution to their demand to increase the OAS?
So, David, I appreciate that you were asking that question, but I have to say that I do not negotiate in public, and I don't discuss the contents of conversations that happen with any of the political parties.
Now, while that interview was underway, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet appeared at a microphone and appeared to move up his deadline.
They might hope that they will go further than October 29th. They will not. So they have until a few days from now to go on with the royal recommendation. And if they do not, we will start as rapidly as next week to speak with other oppositions in order to get ready to go into an election.
Bloc Québécois Deputy House Leader Christine Normandin joins me now. Ms. Normandin, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me once again.
I want to make sure I fully understand the implications of what your leader had to say today. It sounds like if he doesn't get some sort of clear direction from the government in the coming days, by next week, you start talking to the other parties about bringing down this government. Is that a fair assessment of what he's saying?
Yes, because we mentioned that we would start having discussions as soon as we'd realize that it would be impossible for both our bills to pass, to get the royal sanction, so pass in both houses. So with the time passing, we can feel that it might become more difficult, but even though the window is closing, it's still not completely shut. So we're still hoping that there's a possibility that we make gains on Bill C-319. The royal recommendation is a procedure that takes maybe 48 hours to get. So there's still a window of opportunity, but time is starting to run against the Liberals. We still give them a chance, but we won't be unnecessarily patient.
Okay, so help me understand that, because Mr. Blanchet says they still have in the coming days. Does that mean, like, by the weekend, you need to know if they're going to give you the boost in the old age security, or you start the conversations with the Conservatives and the NDP?
Well, my leader, Mr. Blanchet, mentioned a week-ish. I think that's reasonable. It would still give, well, let's say, for example, that the government grants the royal recommendation. It would still give 2 weeks approximately to get the bill passed. It is feasible. It becomes more and more difficult to do so, but it is still feasible. So around a week is, I think it's a good and reasonable margin.
So what does that mean for October 29th? Because if you know in the coming days or within the week that they're not going to meet you there, does October 29th still hold as the deadline, or does that just go away and things get accelerated in terms of you pulling your support for the Liberals?
If we get a solid no, if they tell us very bluntly that they won't grant the royal recommendation, then I think they would have made their bed on the bill, and then it would be reasonable on our part to start the discussions, because it would become impossible for the bills to pass, and that's what the deadline is about, giving the time to make the bills pass. But we said if we know earlier than October 29th that it will be impossible and a solid no would make it impossible, well, then there's nothing refraining us from starting the discussions on how to topple the government with other opposition parties.
Well, you got a solid no today, at least from the cabinet and the majority of the caucus. I know 5 MPs from Atlantic Canada voted with you, and Pablo Rodriguez, interestingly, now that he's seeking the leadership of the Quebec Liberal Party, voted with you you. What message do you take from the vote today? Because the House Leader says this was on procedural grounds, that a private member's bill can't force them to spend this money. But it's also, you've heard what people said about why they're voting the way they're voting. It doesn't sound like they're keen to give you what you want.
Well, the official explanation that was given to us was not on the merits of the bill itself or on the royal recommendation. As you mentioned, it was more something procedural. They don't want the government to ask the government to grant royal recommendation. It would be a precedent they don't want to set. That's their analysis of the thing. But it was not a solid no on giving the royal recommendation. Since it was not a binding motion that we voted today, the government still has the power to grant the royal recommendation and listen to the House, who in majority asked for it. So it is still possible that they go along with the royal recommendation. And we have to remember, people, also that the bill has passed second reading in the House, and it also passed unanimously in committee on report stage. So there's a rather big consensus on the merits of the bill.
But help me understand then how you get to yes, though, because Mr. Blanchet has said it's all or nothing. He's not willing to negotiate on the terms he's put on the table, which is the 10% increase. It's a $16 billion cost increase. You heard Liberals say it's too expensive. The government voted no today. Mr. Duclos was saying yesterday that this is not the best way to help seniors. So if they were going to meet the demands as laid out by Mr. Blanchet, you would know by now, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily. We're still giving them a chance. That's why we came with the deadline of October 29th. And still, even though there's people arguing on the merits, it's still passed with majority of the House on second reading and on report stage. So people can still argue on the merits, but it has passed and it can still be granted by the government. And that's what gives us a bit of hope. It's thinning, let's say, with today's vote, but there's still a chance. And we are there to make gains, not to topple the government just for the sake of toppling the government. So if there's still a window, and a week is not very long, so if there's still a 1 week window, we'll use it. And then if we don't get the royal recommendation, we'll know that the bill won't pass, and then we'll have the discussions. But we're still hoping that some gains can be made.
But help me understand, you're saying making gains, which implies a negotiation. Mr. Blanchet said no negotiation. So, like, what is going on here? I spoke to Karina Gould briefly today, and she'll say that she's talking to House leaders all the time, but she won't say what the details of those are. Are you in active negotiations with the Liberals on some sort of a compromise on the OAS, or is it just give us everything by this date or else?
We could compromise on how to get our bill passed, maybe work extra hours and stuff like that. That could be parts of discussion, but the bill itself is not. And that has been clearly mentioned by my leader today. We won't accept any other alternative because we'd have to start all over again. Let's say, for example, the government comes with a different way of increasing OAS or GIS, then not only them, but also other political parties could start wanting to make amendments, install the bill. We already have a bill that's been tabled in order and been voted on with a consensus. Why not use it? That's the best way to go along with what we're aiming at, instead of having opportunities for delays and delays and delays. And we said we'll go no further than October 29th, and the best way to do so is with our bill, which is already tabled and in perfect order.
Okay, but I guess this is where I'm getting a little bit lost in the timelines. October 29th was the deadline that was set, but then Mr. Blanchet talked about next week. So you say you've got a week here before to more or less get the firm yes. October 29th is not for them to say yes. October 29th is it's all done. So if you don't get a firm yes by like what, Monday when Parliament comes back, that's when the talks start? I mean, is that what we're talking about here? It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. You call the Conservatives, you call the NDP, and negotiations begin?
Let's go for a week-ish. Since the royal recommendation takes something like 48 hours to get, if we don't get it by approximately the end of next week or the Thanksgiving week, it would allow the government to approximately 2 weeks to have the bill passed in third reading in the House and then have it passed in the Senate. It is feasible. It's more complicated, but still feasible. So that it's a step-by-step process. We'll see see as every day passes where we're at and if there's still a chance that it works, even though it gets more complicated and more difficult. But as soon as we see, well, it's humanly impossible that the bill passes, then we'll start having the discussions. We were pretty clear on that.
Okay, so in terms of negotiations and discussions between the parties and between the House leaders on this, those are focused, from your perspective, exclusively and solely on the process to deliver what you've demanded, not on watering down the request. There's no negotiation on the final form of the benefit that you insist they must deliver, the Liberals, to sustain your support until the end of this calendar year.
Exactly, because if we open the door to any alternative, we open the door to delays, and we know the Liberals to be experts at that. So since we have something on the table that already fixes the discrimination they created themselves, I think it's the best way it's the best that we just use it and not try to water it down or stall the process. It's the easiest path, and that's the one we're aiming for.
When is your next meeting of House leaders, when you expect to get an indication from the government on whether they can meet things in this week-ish timeline, as you've described it?
I don't know exactly when the next meeting will be. It's more on a regular basis. Our door is always open. They can call us anytime. We'll answer. So it's sometimes tits and dots of information that is exchanged. So there's no specific schedule. There's no agenda for meetings. They can call us anytime, and we'll answer.
One last question before I let you go. 5 Liberals MPs voted with you on this from Atlantic Canada, significant seniors population. You can understand the political motivation there. But the Conservatives also voted with you, and they've in the past, under Stephen Harper, raised the retirement age from 65 to 67, for example. They have criticized increases in government spending and the deficit in the past. Why do you think Pierre Poilievre's caucus voted with the Bloc Québécois today? What do you think their motivation is there?
Well, it would be in direct line with what they have done in the first votes. Even before we set our deadline of October 29, they voted with us in second reading. So it's just consistency. The way I see it, they're not turning their jacket on their previous votes. So unless they have other motivations, maybe you should ask them. That's the most reasonable I see. And they don't tend to vote with the government. Maybe they knew that the vote would be a no from them today, and just out of habit, they voted for it. But it would still be in a direct line with what they have done in the past, voting in committee and in the House on second reading. They voted they voted yes on the bill, so it's just consistent.
Okay. Bloc Québécois Deputy House Leader Christine Normandin, thank you for being here today. We will want to speak to you in a week-ish when you have clarity on where this is going to go. Thank you for being here.
It's going to be a pleasure. Thank you, David.
Okay, we're going to talk about all of this with the Power Panel. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. And here with me in the studio, Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Okay, so Mr. Blanchet's comments there. Sherelle, I had Christine Normandin as Deputy House Leader on the show earlier and said, help me understand the timelines here. And essentially, they kind of want a yes or a no by next week. If it's a yes, they'll work with the government to get everything in place by October 29th. If it's a no, they start conversations next week with the Conservatives and the NDP to maybe bring this whole House down. What do you make of this development today?
Well, I don't know if we're actually in any different place than we were last week when the Bloc first made the ultimatum, because they did say, you know, we're not going to necessarily wait until the end of October. We are going to, you know, start talking to people before then. But, you know, this is the kind of the decision day. This is when we'll know. Listening to Mr. Blanchet today, he was very kind of firm that he's not really interested in any sort of compromise. So there isn't going to be, okay, well, we're not going to do this, but what if we give you this? He doesn't seem to care about that. He says, this is what our demands are. And if you're not going to meet them, then great, we're going to talk to other people. he also, had a touch of realism about him, saying, I don't know that this bill will pass regardless, which I think it's not something that we hear too often from politicians.
Well, based on the vote today, if the government says yes, it will, right? But yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's not that surprising given that, Liberals didn't vote for this bill at second reading. So now that you've placed this motion in front of them to kind of give that extra to wanting this royal recommendation, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be pushed into all of a sudden supporting it, because then it means that their government won't fall. If they can see another avenue with the NDP, I'm sure they'll take it, because there are a lot of other things riding on this in terms of cost, in terms of, the whole thing about fairness for every generation. All of those things have to ride on this, and you cannot say, yes, we're going to have this done.
Yeah, but Jordan, what I think is interesting today is at second reading, all the Liberals voted against it. Today, 5 Atlantic Canadian MPs voted for it, and Pablo Rodriguez voted for it, former Liberal cabinet minister. But he's got a new.
He's got some other considerations.
Karina Gould says that they voted against it on principle of process. So you can't use a private member's bill to force a royal recommendation, which essentially means the government adopts it and spends the money. You heard the clip pack, though. Too expensive, not the right way to do it. There is an opposition to this on a policy perspective. So based on the vote today, what Mr. Blanchet said, and what the Liberals are saying, where do you think this is?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish Karina Gould all the best luck in communicating that message to voters, because I think the optics of this are really challenging for the government. There may well be a lot of sort of technical reasons why they don't want to use this process to move that policy ahead. They may not like that policy. They may view it as too expensive, as we heard in those clips. But at the end of the day, what most Canadians are going to take away is that they were opposed to an increase in OAS. And that's a pretty challenging message for them. And, particularly, I think that when you look at some of their last voters to hang on and the first groups of voters who may come back, who happen to be older voters. So I think they do have a challenge there. And, as for the Bloc, they've taken a really obviously aggressive stance in their negotiations. I mean, I think it really isn't much of a negotiation, obviously, in their demands. And I think a lot of that reflects the fact that over the past 2 years, they were really sidelined during the confidence and supply agreement. So this is a chance for their moment in the limelight, but they may have now handed that back to the NDP. So I think that they may be burning a little bit too hot on that for their own good.
Yeah, Amanda, the Bloc made it pretty clear to me today that any negotiations they have with the Liberals are on the process of getting this done as quickly and as cleanly as possible, not about the terms of the demand. So based on what we've heard from the Liberals and the move from the Bloc in response today, I mean, do they give them a firm yes or no by next week? It sounds like a no is coming.
Yeah, it sounds like a no is coming. I mean, I think last week the message from the Liberals was that they were in talks with the Bloc, or that they would be in talks with the Bloc, but it sounds like there's not a lot of talking happening. Sounds like there's very little negotiation happening. I agree. I do not love the messaging on this one. I don't think that the supreme message is to come out to say that this is a process issue, that you can't push this through a private member's bill, that a $16 billion price tag is a lot. And I think Canadians recognize that at a time when affordability is at an all-time high and that people feel very stretched. So to imagine the government spending another $16 billion is challenging. And yet at the same time, this is an area that they have traditionally done pretty well in with seniors. This is a base that they want to keep. So I could imagine them being in a negotiation where they might try to not meet the demand, but try to come to an agreeable solution. That's not what the Bloc is in for. The Bloc, this is gamemanship and it's showmanship and it's a moment in the spotlight and it's an all or nothing deal. And that does give Blanchet the microphone for a hot second. But I was also surprised that he wanted to reduce his timeline to next week. It's like, Blanchet, you should be milking this for as long as you can in order to maintain the spotlight on you, on your party, and what you stand for. Giving it away next week felt like, a short sales position for him. And I think that it gives the Liberals a little bit of wiggle room, because for any reasonable person looking in on this, it does feel like they're being held hostage instead of having the opportunity to have a constructive or productive conversation about what's right for the country.
Tim, how do you see all of these developments?
Though, just picking up on Amanda's point there, David, it was really interesting. I saw a web sample, I won't call it a poll today, that was done here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I think it was like 85% of the people sampled at that point in time just think it's a no-brainer to move forward with what the Bloc have proposed. So no wonder Blanchet is pushing it a little bit. He's got a broad public audience to it, and as it relates to the calendar, next week in some ways makes sense because the week after is the Thanksgiving break, so it brings you to the near end of October. But are we closer to an election? I'll go a little farther than Sherelle. It's probably a little bit different than it was last week, and there's probably a few more landmines out there if you're the Liberal government. One of them we delivered to them from Abacus this week with the sample we put out that shows outside of Quebec, the NDP are polling better than the Liberals. Now, they're not shooting the lights out, let me be clear, but that may be motivation for some to say, hey, maybe if we do go, we have a chance now. Will it get better? So there's some more landmines out there, David. It's not a slam dunk that there won't be an election until 2025.
Well, it seems to me it puts more of a squeeze on the NDP quicker, maybe, than people expected, because if the Bloc demands are not met or they get a firm no within a week, then you can't count on the Bloc Québécois for at least the rest of the year. And that puts Jagmeet Singh in an interesting spot. And I just want to show you something. Speaking of Jagmeet Singh in an interesting spot, today he brought in one of his new MPs from Winnipeg, Transcona, Elmwood, Transcona, who won. Just have a watch of this moment in the House of Commons. You can see it there off the top. He kind of did the finger thing at Pierre Poilievre, and he's looking at him. But I think if the Bloc, Jordan, announced next week, people are going to be doing that to Jagmeet Singh, right? Because he said he's going to go vote by vote, and suddenly, because it takes all three of them, and suddenly the math shifts. If Mr. Blanchet moves away, that it's all on Jagmeet Singh.
Right, it does. But remember, everybody's got to turn their key at the same time.
Yes, of course.
So I think for the NDP here, on balance, they would probably still be more likely to hold off. They still need time to gain more distance from the Liberals in the Confidence and Supply Agreement. We still have pharmacare in the Senate, and that's something that's very important for them to see passed. So I think that there's still factors for them that weigh a little bit more heavily on weighting. But I will say that there's absolutely no question that the party's looking very closely at those polls, and that passing the Liberals outside of Quebec is a really significant milestone because it speaks to the party's viability in terms of being the best option for voters who are interested in stopping Pierre Poilievre. So that will definitely be a factor in their thinking about elections.
Certainly in the Abacus numbers, though, Jordan, a lot of that was in the prairies, where it's not necessarily going to translate into seats. And some of it could be boosted a bit by what's happening with Nenshi, what's happening with Carla Beck in Saskatchewan, and Eby in British Columbia, right? Because there is sometimes that conflation between provincial and federal brands, right?
But I would say, we've seen in the past as well that sometimes when the NDP does well provincially, that can create a lift in federal numbers. Certainly that was the case in 2015 with Rachel Notley's win in Alberta. And so you may be seeing a bit of that dynamic here as well.
Okay, so Sherelle, I mean, if the Bloc tells us in a week-ish, as Ms. Normandin said, they need their answer by that, it's out, forget October 29th, they're not going to give it to us, we're starting negotiations. That puts Mr. Singh back in the situation he tried to get out of with the elimination of the ending of the supply and confidence agreement. I mean, you heard what Jordan said about like the factors they have to consider. I mean, they still need this to go through the fall, do they not, if you're a New Democrat?
Well, yeah, they do, because, the timeline for pharmacare in the Senate is supposed to be Thanksgiving. The Senate, of course, is the Senate, and it'll do what the Senate does. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do things on the timelines that everybody wants them to do them on. So you can't necessarily hang your hat on that as a certainty. And as Jordan said, they need that time to create that distance. They've spent all of this time tying themselves to the Liberals. So on one hand, you want to have time to create that distance, but by getting that time to create that distance, you have to continue to prop up the Liberal government. Right. So that's going to be a really tricky balance, and they might find that it's not necessarily worth it to say, ultimately to say, you know what, we did what we could, we did our part, we pushed everything to the point that we could push it, but now it's time for Canadians to decide.
Yeah, Amanda, it seems like it's a sack of hokey pokey that we'll be getting into if the Bloc does say enough is enough. And like pharmacare and all of these things, there's the parliamentary calendar, but like whether you've moved ahead of the Liberals or not in the polls in sort of the, outside of Quebec, if Pierre Poilievre's party are at 45, 46, 47%, everybody's getting creamed, except maybe the Bloc Québécois. So like, parliamentary calendar kind of becomes an excuse for the reality on the ground that they're all facing once the buses start rolling.
Of course, this has little to do, in my mind, with trying to distance themselves from the Liberals, which of course they have to do, but more to do with the fact that every party needs more time to attack the Conservatives in order to put a dent in what's happening with their poll numbers. There is no way that any party, even the Bloc, wants to go to the polls when the Conservatives are up in the 40s. There's no way. That's just an improbable calculus as far as I'm concerned. So I think that the likelihood of the NDP siding at this juncture when A, they're in provincial elections, B, they need to raise a lot more money, C, their numbers are still in the teens. There is no way that at this juncture they're going to say, you know what's a good time to go to an election? You know what a good time to bring Canadians to the polls is right now. Everybody wants the time. So I can't imagine this happening anytime before 2025.
Tim?
Except, David, I was just going to say everybody wants the time. I think that is true of the New Democrats and the Liberals, but in that same poll that we're talking about, the Bloc were at 37, 38. For Mr. Blanchet, I don't think he needs the same time to the same degree because Mr. Poilievre isn't necessarily scoring as well in Quebec as he is everywhere else. However, to Jordan's point, you need 3 keys to go in at the same time to put in the launch code and to make it effective. I don't know. I just feel the only difference I feel is there's a little bit more instability. And sometimes in these circumstances, ego, personality, and all of those things can lead to an error being made. So the chances of an error are potentially higher now than they were last week.
Well, as